In this lecture, we will talk about some of the issues and challenges associated with working with diverse clients. As we begin our discussion of diversity, let's start by looking at some terminology and how it will impact our work as mental health counselors. The term multicultural is used to refer to any of the interactions, whether they be at an individual level, a group level, or a societal level, between members of a minority, ethnic, or racial group and the dominant European American culture. Traditionally, European Americans, or Caucasian Americans as you may also see them referred, have been the dominant group in the United States population. Recent data suggests that this may be changing. According to the latest U.S. Census data taken from the 2010 census collection, 37% of the United States population is now from an ethnic minority group. This is up over 12% from previous numbers in the census of 2000. How does this changing demographic affect us as mental health counselors? Approximately 25% of all community mental health clients come from minority groups. So there's a good chance that a significant portion of the client base you serve will be from a minority group. What's more troubling is that half of these individuals will only present for one session. After that one session, for a variety of reasons, they choose not to continue seeking care. So while help may be beneficial for these individuals, they choose not to pursue it for one reason or another. So as we talk about multiculturalism being representative of several different cultures coming together, let's look at the term culture. When we talk about culture, it's traditionally defined as a group of people who identify or associate with one another on the basis of some common purpose, need, or similarity of background. Individuals from the same cultural group share common interests or characteristics. While many people equate culture with race or ethnicity, it actually goes much farther than that. Our culture incorporates both ethnographic and demographic variables. Where we are from, the customs and beliefs of the people we associate with, all contribute to our culture. We use terms such as African American, Native American, Caucasian American, but there are differences among those groups as well. There also are differences among Americans. There are cultural differences between the South and the North, the East Coast, the West Coast, rural settings and urban settings. So when we consider culture, we need to take into account several different variables. This expansive view of culture makes challenging the counseling process. As counselors, we will have clients who come in from all different walks of life. One may not be like the other. And so we really need to focus on individual efforts with the clients we serve. As we look at the diversity of our country, we could see differences and cultural effects of several different variables. Most of these are covered in federal legislation, whether it's the Equal Employment Opportunities or the American with Disabilities Act. But different cultures are seen in terms of age, disability, religion, ethnicity, sexual preference, socioeconomic status, membership in an indigenous population, nationality, and gender. The United States has long been seen as the melting pot of the world, where several different cultures come together in an attempt to blend as one. The world that we live in today is not going to be the world that our children or grandchildren grow up and live in. By the year 2050, 54% of the U.S. population is expected to be represented by members of ethnic minority groups. For the first time, Caucasian Americans or white Americans will no longer make up the majority, over 50% of the U.S. population. We see this starting to take effect now. Currently, ethnic minority children now account for nearly 50% of all children residing in the United States under the age of 5. As this generation grows and previous generations pass on, our minority population will become much larger in this country. Furthermore, we see shifts in where individuals are coming to this country from. Where previously immigrants came from Europe and Canada, we now see the largest number of immigrants coming from Latin America and Asia. In fact, Latin Americans now comprise the largest minority group in the United States. As these numbers continue to grow, it becomes apparent that mental health counselors will need to adapt their practices to best meet the needs of this changing demographic. In general, some things to consider when working with diverse or multicultural clients. When it comes to help-seeking behavior and availing themselves of the services of a counselor, ethnic minorities are less likely to seek professional help than their white counterparts. According to previous research studies, white clients are 1.5 times more likely to voluntarily seek mental health care than are African Americans. Why is it that these individuals are not seeking help? Well, a number of reasons have been suggested. It could be that many of these minority clients fear the mental health system, feeling that it is a system established by white America with a goal of helping issues and problems identified by white Americans, and one that is not fully responsive to their unique needs and challenges. As a result, There are several barriers that practitioners will need to attempt to overcome in working with minority clients. For one, there's a cultural stigma attached with help-seeking behaviors in some cultures. For some cultures, seeking help is a sign of weakness. Identifying that you have a problem that you cannot handle yourself is not condoned. For some minority individuals, there's a lack of knowledge regarding available services. They are not familiar with what is available in terms of therapeutic services or psychiatric services in and around their community. In some cases, they may be aware of the services, but they have limited funding, which precludes them from seeking these services. Although they are available, they cannot afford to follow up with these services. Literature shows us that many minority clients will first turn to non-professionals for support with their problems. This can include family and friends, pastors or other religious leaders, community elders. It is much more an accepted practice to seek help from these sources than it is from a clinician or psychologist. And finally, some minority clients will opt to seek alternative sources of help. Herbalists, natural remedies, spiritual leaders or shamans, rather than seeking a counselor. These barriers are significant to recognize because minorities are at risk. Some statistics that may alarm you: ethnic minorities are more likely to belong to high-risk groups, such as the homeless or the HIV infected. While suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the United States, it's in the top 3 for many minority groups. It's particularly prevalent amongst adolescent and young adults in these minority groups. Referring back to the funding issue, ethnic minorities are more likely to lack health insurance compared to their white American counterparts. African American, Latino, and Asian American clients are 2 to 3 times more likely to be uninsured. As a result, the help that they need and may even want is out of their reach. With that stage being set, how do we as mental health counselors prepare to work with clients from diverse populations? Recognizing that society is becoming more diverse and that counselors will need to change and adapt to work with this more diverse population, ACA has set out to develop competencies. These competencies should guide counselors in working with clients from diverse populations. The competencies included in this document are organized into 3 distinct areas: awareness, knowledge, and skills. In the awareness category, counselors are encouraged to recognize the importance of diversity in terms of how it affects and influences our clients and how it shapes the world they live in. With knowledge, counselors are encouraged to learn more about unique and individual cultural characteristics of those clients with whom they will work in their day-to-day practice. The more familiar you become with cultural intricacies of these groups, the better able you are to tailor your approach and develop a strong working relationship with clients from other cultures. And thirdly, skills. The practical component. Putting into practice what you know. Taking your basic counseling skills and adapting them to meet the needs of a culturally diverse client base. Across all these areas, there are some common themes among the competencies. The first states that all counseling is cross-cultural. Referring back to our definition of culture, which saw it expanding beyond just ethnicity or race, all our counseling is cross-cultural. Even when I'm working with a client who looks exactly like me, we come from different backgrounds, different home environments, different upbringings, and so there's going to be a difference in our cultural context or worldview. The counseling we perform happens in a context that's influenced by many institutional and societal biases and norms. What we do, the services we offer, how clients avail themselves of those services, and how participatory they are in the process is all going to be influenced by these norms. The competencies described by ACA all reflect a relationship between a white counselor and a client from a minority status. We know, of course, that there are counselors from minority groups who will be working with both clients from other minority groups or also the European American or Caucasian American group. And so competencies will need to be developed for these types of relationships. Since minorities are often marginalized, our understanding of their needs may not be on par with the understanding we have of clients from the dominant or majority culture. Knowledge is going to be the key, learning more about these populations. And keeping in mind that counseling is truly a culture-bound profession. We cannot work with individuals and help them to address their issues and challenges without considering the influence of culture. As a counselor, you can develop your cultural competence in a number of different ways. You can activate your schemas and confirmatory biases. Before working with culturally diverse clients, it's important for you to become introspective. Think about how you feel about different cultural groups. Are there any preconceived notions or biases that you have? If so, these will preclude you from treating the client with the respect that's required. Become aware of between and within group differences. Know how different groups act, think, and feel. Know the difference between African Americans and Asian Americans. Also know the between group differences. Among the Asian American community, there are Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans. Breaking it down even further, all Japanese Americans are not alike. We need to focus on clients' racial identity development. In a moment, we'll talk more about racial identity, but knowing where a client is in terms of their acceptance of who they are culturally and racially and how they fit into the larger community will be important. And finally, recognize that clients have multiple identities. Even amongst ourselves, there are several identities we fill. We could be students, employees, parents, children, spouses, aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends, community leaders. Most of us fill many different roles and identities. And so recognizing that individuals have multiple identities, and at times these identities may coexist, will be important. To assist you in working with clients, particularly during the assessment and beginning stages of counseling, the Respectful Counseling Cube may prove useful. Respectful is an anagram here. Each of the letters represents a different cultural variable that you should assess or consider in working with a client. Each of these may prove useful in better understanding the client's worldview. What is that individual's religion or spiritual affiliation? What is their economic background? What is their sexual identity? What is their psychological maturity? Ethnic or racial identity? Chronological stage, where are they developmentally for their age? Has there been any trauma or significant events in their life? What is their family background? Are there any unique physical characteristics, disabilities would fit in this category? And what is their location? Geographically, where are they residing, and what is the environment that they are raised in? Some of the influences that impact how culturally diverse clients think, feel, and act. The family that they come from. The language that they speak. The gender role socialization for their culture. In other words, what are women supposed to be doing? What are men supposed to be doing? How are the different genders to act, to think? What religious or spiritual influences do they have? And finally, what are their attitudes and behaviors towards help seeking? Is it an activity that is condoned? Or is it an activity that is shunned? Are counselors seen as advocates or enemies? Considering all these factors will help you to become a culturally competent counselor. What would prevent you from being a culturally competent counselor are the following. Cultural encapsulation. Believing that all individuals fall under the same category. All members of a cultural group are not the same. A misapplication of traditional theories and techniques as well. Applying an approach that may not be appropriate for that individual, given their background and current situation. Systemic barriers are also in the way. Services that are not tailored to meet the needs of the clients for which they were designed. In cultural groups where privacy and individuality are stressed, offering group counseling sessions would not be beneficial. In addition, the cost of services may price them out of the market for many individuals, thus making treatment unobtainable. And finally, language barriers and miscommunication. We may not be speaking the same language, or the language we use may not be the native language for the clients we serve. And as a result, some of what we discuss may be lost in translation, and the true meaning or intent of our actions is clouded. Now, even though there are several different factors or variables that make up an individual's culture, we'll spend the majority of our time discussing the two that you'll most commonly encounter in your work with clients. That being race and ethnicity, as well as age. So we hear the terms race and ethnicity often in society and conversation in the media. And oftentimes they're used interchangeably. But do they mean the same thing? Not exactly. When we talk about race, we're talking about physical appearance or physical characteristics. What are the physical characteristics that group individuals together? Whether it be skin color, hair type, eye color, height, build, all of these are racial characteristics. Ethnicity is more related to cultural factors. What are the cultural factors that group individuals together? Italians look very similar to Germans and to French. Both have white skin, but they are markedly different. There are cultural variables at play here. So ethnicity is not just what we see, it's what we learn from the individuals about who they are and what they believe in. In working with racially and ethnically diverse clients, we deal with issues of assimilation and acculturation. Assimilation is a process where cultural minorities are absorbed or integrated into the dominant culture. This process can occur voluntarily or involuntarily. An example of assimilation would be an individual who joins the military. Once you enlist in the military and report for basic training, you are quickly assimilated into the dominant culture of the military. Your individuality and uniqueness are left behind. The military example is an example of voluntary assimilation, but there also is involuntary situation. The Jewish being placed in concentration camps in World War II would be involuntary assimilation. Africans being rounded up and brought to the United States and placed in slavery would be an example of involuntary assimilation. The opposite of assimilation is acculturation. In acculturation, individual cultures merge together and influence one another to the point that a new blended culture emerges. This new blended culture takes on characteristics of both groups. Acculturation is the process that takes place in interracial marriages as two individuals come together, sharing their backgrounds. How well acculturation occurs depends on certain factors. We could look at the history of the migration experience. An individual is more likely to acculturate into the mainstream culture when they had a positive migration experience, meaning they voluntarily came to this country. The distance from their country of origin. Is there still an opportunity for them to remain connected with their homeland? Their place of residence and socioeconomic status, whether they are affluent or poor, whether they have means and resources or not. The type of neighborhood. Is this family the only diverse family in the neighborhood? Or is their family living in a neighborhood that's very international in feel? How closely connected are the family members? Are they a support for one another during this acculturation process? And finally, how unique are their language and customs? It may be that they're very similar to the dominant culture. So adopting some of the dominant cultural customs is not much of a stretch. On the other hand, the cultures may be complete opposites. And so compromising and learning to merge the two together is much more challenging. I mentioned earlier the concept of racial identity. Racial identity is talked about frequently in the professional research. It's a concept that determines our worldview, how we understand the world around us, is predicated on how we have individually come to terms with our racial or ethnic background. And there are several models of racial or ethnic identity, as well as models for different groups. All of them are similar in that they describe how we grow in our acceptance of who we are in the acceptance of others. Because it's a growth model, it's also seen as a hierarchical model, that our growth and maturity occurs in stages or levels. Each of these stages and levels builds on the previous until we grow to a fully mature state of racial identity. Where we are on this growth influences our thoughts, our actions, and our feelings, and how we respond to race and race-related matters. So let's talk about the different stages of racial identity. The first stage, the most basic stage, is one of conformity. This is where a member of a minority racial group completely conforms to the majority population. In an effort to fit in and not be seen as different, this individual acts, thinks, and feels as the majority culture does. They completely push aside their own backgrounds, cultures, and beliefs and adopt those of the majority culture. The second stage is called dissonance. At the dissonance stage, the individual experiences some event that causes them to question their allegiance to the majority culture. Some event where they feel discriminated or biased against leads them to question, why did this happen? I think and act exactly the way they do. Why would they treat me differently? This dissonance event leads to resistance and immersion. Because the individual feels that the majority culture is still shunning them despite their conformity, they revert back to their own culture and beliefs. By focusing exclusively on their own native culture, they begin to resist or resent the majority culture. Eventually, the pain and the hurt subside, and a stage of introspection is reached. This is where the individual attempts to reconcile and find a common ground between their native culture and the majority culture. And finally, a state of integrative awareness, this being the optimal or most mature state of racial identity, where the individual is able to accept and appreciate their own cultural values and beliefs, and understand the perspectives of others in the majority culture. Depending on where your client is on this continuum, will influence what you discuss in counseling and the techniques and interventions that you may use. Furthermore, We now have a new view of culture that can help you in working with your clients. We now view culture more as an ideology than a group of people. A cultural group really no longer exists. It's now ideologies that group people together. Whether you are conservative, or liberal, or progressive, these are ideas that spread across all other types of groups: racial, ethnic, gender, age. And so culture now is seen as belief systems, value orientations, customs, norms, and practices of different social institutions. This new postmodern view also places emphasis on language, how we communicate being an important cultural factor. And so again, as culture and our understanding of culture changes, so too will our counseling approach to these clients. We also need to consider age. We'll specifically talk about adults first. And so just like with racial and ethnic groups, we talk about between and within group differences, there also are within group differences when it comes to age. Although we think of adulthood being 18 or over, as that is a legal definition in most states, there are different types of adults and different developmental milestones and plateaus along the course of adulthood. Understanding the developmental issues that these different individuals face will be important. So we could look at dividing adulthood into 3 stages: young, middle, and late adulthood. When trying to identify where your client is, keep in mind that it's not simply their physical age, it's also their psychological age and their life situation. There is not a specific number that once you reach that age, everyone automatically enters into the next developmental stage. Some may develop earlier, others may develop later. When working with young adults, we have issues of singlehood. Here, Erikson's stage of intimacy versus isolation. Individuals are still coming to grips with who they are, building romantic relationships, trying to find their place in the world. Clients find that special someone and get married, and the newlywed stage presents a new set of challenges. Merging together, combining finances, living together, making decisions for the group rather than the individual, starting to plan a family, balancing career and family time. There also are unique challenges related to parenthood with young children. So depending on where your client is and what their developmental issues are, your approach may vary. For middle adults, there could be a midlife crisis or transition. Job changes, life changes, moving. It's during middle adulthood that individuals need to let go of their adolescent dreams and start coming to terms with their own mortality, realizing that there is an expiration date on their life. Individuals who struggle with this realization that their life is coming to an end may try to escape. They may try to overcompensate, or they may even decompensate. Individuals need to be aware that their life has a limit, and knowing that will bring meaning to it. In late adulthood, we see people who are still physically and mentally active, those who are entering into retirement, empty nest syndrome, the challenges that come with now being able to devote your time and energy to your own activities and interests rather than work and career. Later in life, late adulthood, individuals become more limited in what they can do. Their physical and mental capacities are diminished. They may not be able to live on their own. So understanding these developmental issues is helpful. And just like with adults, there are different developmental challenges for children as well. When working with young children, ages 2 to 6, you deal with issues such as autonomy versus shame and doubt, or initiative versus guilt. In middle childhood, as they start going to school, industry versus inferiority is the developmental challenge. And then finally into adolescence, the teen years, identity and role confusion. Trying to find out who they are and where they belong are important issues to discuss with clients in this age group. When working with children, it's important to recognize that there are several influences on their lives. Family certainly plays a large role, as for many of the years, the family is their main source of contact with the outside world. Parenting style, in particular, plays a role on how a child develops. Was the parent controlling or authoritarian? Were they more egalitarian? Was it a collaboration? Each of these shapes how the individual grows and matures. Outside of the family, we see the influence of schools and peers, both what they're learning in school and who they're associating with. As children age, peers become the more important voice and source of information. By the adolescent years, peers replace family as the majority source of influence. We also see the influence of culture, society, television, media, the internet, all shape how children grow and understand the world around them. And so as we deal with these diverse clients from all different cultural backgrounds, there are different types of services that we could offer to meet their unique needs. For some, clinical services may be required. We may need to work on psychological distress, medications, treatment. For some, it's a social welfare approach, helping them gain access to community services. and addressing the problems of inequality and the stress and anxiety that causes. For some, it's empowerment, helping them to overcome their own unique barriers in life, whether they be psychological, economic, political, or social. The challenge for you as the clinical mental health counselor is understanding your client and your client's needs and identifying the service model that best provides you with the opportunity to successfully meet those needs. And so as you work with clients, realize that every client you see walks into your office with a different worldview and perspective. They need not look different than you to think and feel different than you. Once we understand that we all are different, and we're able to embrace that diversity and difference, can we truly begin to work as a culturally competent counselor?